The egg was already cracked when Drew found it. It sat in the hollow of a collapsed stone arch, half buried in blue moss, surrounded by the kind of silence that follows something terrible. Whatever the arch had once belonged to was long gone. The ruins of it stretched across a hillside at the edge of the bioluminescent forest, older than any structure the colonists had built on Ardenmoor, older possibly than anything they had a name for. Drew Calloway was not looking for eggs. He was mapping soil composition along the eastern ridge for his research log when his boot nearly crushed it. He stopped, crouched down, looked at it for a long moment. It was pale gold, smaller than he expected, and something inside it was moving. He took it back to his outpost in both hands and did not put it down for 6 hours. When the shell finally split, what came out was small enough to fit in his jacket pocket. A dragon, by every definition of the word, with translucent gold scales that caught the lamplight and violet eyes that blinked at him slowly, without fear. He named her Sola. That was 3 months ago. Now she was the size of a large cat. Her scales had deepened to a warm, solid gold with faint silver at the tips, and she slept approximately 22 hours a day. She slept on his desk while he worked. She slept in his field satchel when he went out. She slept curled against his back when he sat in his chair too long and dozed off himself. She slept through storms, through the colony's generator alarms, through Noel Adler banging on the outpost door at all hours with geological samples and strong opinions about everything. She ate well. She occasionally opened her eyes, looked at Drew with those deep violet eyes as though confirming he was still there, and then closed them again. She breathed small, warm puffs of golden light when she exhaled in deep sleep. The light did nothing except glow softly and smell faintly of warm stone. Drew documented all of it. That was his job. He was a xenobiologist, and Sola was, as far as anyone knew, the only living specimen of her kind on Ardenmoor or possibly anywhere. He wrote careful notes. He recorded her sleep cycles. He measured her scale temperature, which ran warmer than anything biological had a right to. He also talked to her constantly, which was not in his job description, but which he did anyway. Quietly, the way you talk to someone who is sleeping but might still hear you. Commander Ryao-se thought he had lost his mind. She said so, professionally, on the morning the Vorcai came for the first time. The Vorcai were not subtle. They came in formation, 6 armored units moving through Duskgate's outer perimeter before the colony's basic sensors finished their morning cycle. They were tall, scaled in dark green and gray, and they moved with the particular confidence of people who had never been told no and found the concept annoying. Their weapons were already drawn. They were not there to talk. The alarm hit every building in the settlement at once. Drew was already up, had been up for an hour, sitting at his desk with a cold cup of something and his research notes. Sola was on his back, draped across his shoulders like a warm scarf, breathing slowly. The sound started, weapon discharge, the crack of the outer fence post going down, people running and shouting in the paths between buildings. Drew pulled on his coat, slipped Sola carefully into his satchel, and went out. He was not a soldier. He did not pretend to be one. What he did was move through the evacuation with the kind of calm that came from genuinely not prioritizing himself, directing people toward the bunker, helping an older woman with a broken cartwheel, carrying a child whose father had already run ahead. The Vorcai moved through. They discharged weapons at buildings, not people, a statement, not a massacre. They broke equipment. They burned the communications relay. Then they left, as cleanly as they had come, and the silence came back in their wake like a held breath finally released. The whole thing lasted 20 minutes. Through all of it, Sola did not move. Drew checked on her twice during the chaos, peeling the satchel open to look at her. She was completely, peacefully asleep. Her scales rose and fell. Her small face was tucked against her own tail. When it was over, Drew sat on the step of his damaged outpost in the dark. He took Sola out of the satchel and held her against his chest. She stirred slightly, pushed her face against the hollow of his collarbone, sighed a tiny golden breath, and went back to sleep. Commander Ose found him there. She looked at the dragon. She looked at him. That creature slept through all of it, she said. She did, Drew agreed. Ose pressed her lips together. She had 3 wounded settlers, a destroyed relay, and a Vorcai unit that would absolutely come back. She did not have time for a xenobiologist and his sleeping lizard. When they come back, she said. And they will. That thing is not going to help us. Drew looked down at Sola. The gold light pulsed faintly from between his fingers, slow and steady as a heartbeat. I know, he said. He did not sound worried. He sounded, Osei thought, like someone who had not yet understood the situation. She walked away. Drew stayed where he was, in the dark, with the dragon sleeping on his chest and the twin moons of Ardenmoor rising slow and white over the damaged settlement. And he stayed there until Sola shifted, climbed up to his shoulder, breathed her warm light against his cheek once, and went back to sleep. He put his hand up and held her gently in place so she would not fall. The forest beyond the settlement glowed blue and quiet. Nothing moved. 3 days after the first assault, Sub-Commander Drav held a review. He stood at the front of the command post with his hands behind his back and spoke in the clipped, efficient way of someone who had never needed to repeat himself. His unit sat in 2 rows. Outside the reinforced walls, Ardenmoor's wind moved through the tall silver grass that surrounded their camp, and the twin moons were already fading into a pale morning sky. Drav pulled up the tactical file on humans. Category 3 nuisance species, it read. Limited military technology. Emotional behavioral patterns inhibit rational threat response. No significant territorial defense capability. Displacement expected within 2 to 4 operations. He closed the file. We are on schedule, he said. 1 more sweep, with pressure on the settlement core, and Duskgate will request withdrawal. After that, Ardenmoor is fully accessible for Vorcai resource processing. No one disagreed. There was no reason to. In the back row, Hessa did not disagree either. She was the unit's intelligence analyst, younger than most of the soldiers, and she disagreed with things quietly and only in her own log. She had filed a report 2 days ago. It had not been acknowledged. She pulled it up again on her personal screen under the table and read the key line for the 4th time. Anomalous energy signature detected, Eastern Settlement Zone. Ancient classification. Biological origin. Further analysis recommended. Drav had marked it, non-urgent, pending. Hessa looked at the numbers again. They were not non-urgent. She did not know what they were, exactly, but they pulsed with a rhythm that matched no Vorcai technology and no known Ardenmoor fauna. Whatever was producing that signature was alive, and it was in the human settlement, and it had been there since before the first sweep. She filed a second report. She flagged it 1 level higher. Then she closed her screen and watched Drav finish the briefing, and said nothing. Across the settlement, in his battered outpost, Drew was awake and thinking about the same anomaly from the opposite direction. He had been watching Sola carefully since the attack. He had expected her to react, to the noise, to the light of the weapons, to the fear in people's voices. She had not even slightly. He had checked his own research notes 3 times, looking for anything he might have missed, any pattern in her sleep cycles, any sign that external events affected her. There was one entry that kept pulling at him. Day 61. Accidentally startled Sola awake by dropping a data pad near her head. She opened her eyes fully, looked at me, then immediately fell back asleep. No distress response. She seems to wake only when she chooses to, or possibly only when something specific prompts it. Unknown what that specific thing might be. He had written that entry weeks ago and moved on. Now he read it differently. He set up a small test. He moved to the far end of the outpost, turned his back to her, and tried to make himself feel afraid. Genuinely afraid, not performed. He thought about the Vorcai coming back. He thought about not being fast enough to help someone. He let it sit in his chest, the real weight of it. Across the room, Sola's left eye opened halfway. Her scales brightened, barely, just a degree warmer in their gold, like a lamp turning up slightly in a dim room. Then Drew exhaled, reset himself, let the feeling go. Her eye closed. The scales settled. He sat down slowly and wrote. Scale luminosity and partial waking state appear to correlate with my emotional distress. Physical proximity not required. Mechanism unknown. Then he sat back and thought about that for a long time. Noel came in without knocking, as he always did, tracking dirt on the floor, holding a rock sample in one hand, and a look of mild complaint on his face. The Vorcai burned the east sensor post, Noel said, which means we have no eastern coverage, which means when they come back, we will not know about it until they are already inside the fence. I know, Drew said. Also, your dragon is on my chair again. Sola was, in fact, on Noelle's chair. She was on her back, all four small limbs in the air, tail curled to one side, completely unconscious. Noelle stood over her with the expression of a man who had made peace with something he still found annoying. "She is never awake," he said. "She is literally never awake. She did not wake up for a Vorcai assault. What exactly is she good for?" Drew considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet," he said. Noelle set the rock down. He looked at Sola for another moment. Her wings, still small, still slightly too large for her body in the way of young things not yet grown into themselves, were half open, trailing off the edge of the chair. "She is going to fall," Noelle said. "She won't," Drew said. "She never does." That evening, Commander Osei stopped by. She stood in the doorway and did not come in. She looked at Sola on the chair and Drew at his desk, and something in the scene seemed to frustrate her in a way she could not quite name. "You need to think seriously about what happens if you cannot get her out in time," Osei said. "If the Vorcai come back harder, and they will, there will not be room to carry an animal." Drew nodded. "She travels well. She does not panic. That's because she is always asleep." "Yes," Drew agreed. Osei stared at him. He looked back at her, steady and mild, and entirely unaffected by her concern. She clicked her teeth together softly, the way she did when she had decided an argument was not worth having, and left. Sola exhaled a small, warm breath in the direction of the door. Then she slept on. The second time the Vorcai came, they did not wait for morning. They came at dusk, when the bioluminescent forest was just beginning to glow and the settlement lights were switching on, one by one, across Duskgate. They came with twice the soldiers and half the patients. The fence did not stop them. The outer defense post managed 3 shots before its operator had to run. Commander Osei had drilled for this. Her people moved well, she had to give them that. They pulled back to the inner lines, used the buildings for cover, kept their fire disciplined. But the Vorcai had stronger weapons and more of them, and discipline only carries a thing so far before the math catches up. Drew was in the medical shelter when the attack started. It was a converted storage building with 2 long tables, a rack of basic supplies, and a single overhead light that buzzed when the generator fluctuated. He had been there for an hour already, helping the settlement's only medical officer with a colonist who had taken a bad fall from the rebuilt fence. He was holding a light and handing over supplies when the wall shook with the first weapon's impact. Sola was in the satchel on the table beside him. She did not move. The next 20 minutes were loud and close and very fast. People came and hurt. Drew helped where he could, firmly, efficiently, not wasting motion. He did not think about fear. He did not have time to. He moved, and when moving stopped, he moved again. The worst moment was when the shelter door burst open and 4 people came in at once, one of them unconscious, and the generator went out and the room went dark for 30 seconds before the backup kicked in and the light buzzed back on, yellow and tired. In those 30 seconds, Drew put one hand on the satchel, just rested it there. Sola's warmth came through the fabric like a steady coal. He pulled his hand back and got back to work. Outside, the fight moved closer to the center of the settlement. Osei was somewhere in it, shouting controlled orders through the comm. The Vorcai were pushing hard. This was not a warning sweep. This was a removal. Then, without explanation, it stopped. The shooting stopped first, then the boots on the ground. Then the Vorcai comms, which had been audible as bursts of their sharp, clicking language, went quiet. Osei's voice on the human comm said, "They're pulling back." Then, "Stay at your posts." Then, "Does anyone know why?" Nobody knew why. The Vorcai withdrew in the same formation they had arrived in, leaving 3 burning structures and 8 wounded colonists and 1 enormous, confused silence behind them. Drew came out of the medical shelter when Osei confirmed the all clear. He stood in the path between buildings and looked at the fires and the people and the smoke moving sideways in the evening wind. Someone was crying 2 buildings down. Someone else was already organizing water to damp down the flames. He opened the satchel. Sola was asleep. She was so deeply, so completely asleep that she looked almost liquid. All of her relaxed, scales smooth, tail wrapped neatly around her own body, face tucked in, the faint golden glow pulsing from her scales so soft it was barely visible in the last light of dusk. Drew closed the satchel. He found a place to sit, a low wall at the edge of the path, not far from the medical shelter. and he sat there while the settlement pulled itself back together around him. He was tired. His hands were steady, but his shoulders were not, and he let them drop and breathed. Elder Pharaoh found him there. The old man was the oldest person in Duskgate by at least 15 years, thin and unhurried, with hands that had worked on starship engines and turned the soil of 3 different worlds. He sat down on the wall beside Drew without being invited, which was his habit, and looked out at the settlement doing its work in the fading light. He did not say anything for a while. Then he looked at the satchel on Drew's lap. "Slept through it again," he said. It was not a question. "Every second of it," Drew said. Pharaoh nodded slowly, the way he nodded at things that confirmed something he already believed. He was quiet again for a moment. A building beam cracked in one of the fires, and the flames shifted, and the blue glow of the forest at the edge of the settlement pulsed gently in response, the way it always did in the evenings. "My grandmother was from a world that had bears," Pharaoh said. "Old Earth species. Big ones. Brown ones. She told me that in the winter, they slept for months, whole seasons, underground, barely breathing. People used to think that meant they were weak in winter, that you could do anything you liked, and the bear would not know." Drew looked at him. "She was very clear," Pharaoh continued, "that the people who tested that theory all had a very bad spring." He stood up, slowly, with the care of a man whose knees had opinions. "She's not sleeping because she's weak," he said. He looked at the satchel once more. "She's sleeping because it's not time yet." He walked away. Drew looked down at the satchel. He put his hand on it again, lightly, the way you touch something you are not sure you fully understand. The warmth came through steady and slow. Inside, Sola breathed her small golden breaths, one after another, in the rhythm of something that had all the time in the world and knew exactly what it was waiting for. The message that pulled archivist Ulvin off a research vessel and onto a military transport took 48 hours to travel across Vorcai space, and 14 more for him to actually arrive. He was old even by Vorcai standards, which meant he was very old indeed. His scales had faded from the dark green of youth to a dusty, pale gray, and he walked with a staff not because he needed it, but because he had carried it for so long it had simply become part of him. He stepped off the transport at the Ardmore Forward Command Post and looked around at the military equipment and the young soldiers with the expression of someone who had seen this kind of thing before and found it consistently unimpressive. Sub-Commander Drav met him at the ramp. Drav was sharp-edged and impatient and made no effort to hide either quality. "You received the energy signature data," Drav said. It was not a welcome. "I received Hessa's report," Ulvin said. "Your analyst has good instincts. You should listen to her more." Drav's jaw tightened. He turned and walked. Ulvin followed without hurrying. Hessa was waiting in the sealed research chamber with the data arranged on 3 screens. She had not slept well. When Ulvin came in, she straightened and gave the formal greeting. He waved it off and walked directly to the screens. He looked at the signature for a very long time. The room was quiet enough that Hessa could hear the wind outside. She watched the old archivist's face change as he read. Not dramatically, not with any sudden alarm, but slowly, the way a stone wall develops a crack, small and precise and impossible to undo once you have seen it. "We're in the settlement," Ulvin said finally. "Eastern Quadrant. A single researcher's outpost. And the bondholder?" Hessa blinked. It was a strange word to reach for first. "There is one individual who appears consistently associated with the signature source. A xenobiologist. Name is Drew Calloway." Ulvin nodded. He pulled out his own reader, old, worn, filled with files that did not exist in any standard Vorcai archive, and opened something. Hessa caught a glimpse of the file title before he turned the screen. The language was Old Vorcai script, a dialect from before the Empire's current form. She could only read part of it. Records of the Ardrith encounter. Year 4200 of the early expansion. She had never heard of the Ardrith. Ulvin began to explain. "The Ardrith," he said, "were not animals. They never had been. They were biological constructs," he said, but that word did not quite cover it. They were old, older than most things that were still alive in the universe, and they were built, or born. The distinction was not clear, for one purpose. Each one bonded at hatching to a single individual. It did not matter what species. It did not matter what the individual had done or would do. The bond was formed by contact, by care, by the ordinary fact of being the first thing the creature knew is safe. After bonding, they entered dormancy. And in dormancy, Ulvin said, they were invisible to any threat system because there was nothing threatening about them. They were simply at peace. They were warm. They were loved. Nothing could move them, not noise, not fire, not weapons, not the death of others nearby. One thing could move them. If that happened, the dormancy ended. Hessa asked, quietly, what happened then? Ulvin put his reader down. He looked at her steadily. The Vorcai military force that first encountered an active Ardrith, he said, was 700 soldiers with full equipment. The engagement lasted approximately 4 minutes. We have records because 3 soldiers were not in the engagement zone and survived to report. The room was very quiet. Hessa turned to the screen. She looked at the energy signature, that soft and rhythmic pulse, gentle and warm as a sleeping breath. She is still in dormancy, Hessa said. Yes, Ulvin said, because your unit has not yet been foolish enough to personally threaten her bondholder. Hessa thought about Drav's orders for the next sweep. She thought about the 6-unit covert operation he had mentioned in the briefing that morning, the one she had not been invited to attend, but had heard about anyway. She thought about a soldier grabbing a human xenobiologist in the dark. She turned to look at Drav, who had been standing against the wall during all of this with his arms crossed. His face was still controlled, but his coloring had changed, a subtle thing in Vorcai physiology, a paleness around the jaw that happened when the blood moved elsewhere. Withdraw, Ulvin said to him, simply. The records could be exaggerated, Drav said. A creature that size. The records are exact, Ulvin said. I wrote several of them myself. Drav said nothing. Ulvin gathered his staff and his reader and walked to the door. He stopped without turning around. The creature does not protect its species, he said. It does not protect the settlement or the planet or any principle. It protects one individual, the human who was kind to it when it hatched. He paused. Whatever your next move is, Subcommander, make certain it does not touch that man. He left. Hessa looked at the screen. The signature pulsed, slow and even and peaceful. She sent a private message to the nearest human university archive that evening. She did not include her name. She wrote only, the dormancy records of the Ardrith are accurate. You may want to document what is on Ardenmoor before the situation changes. Then she sat in the quiet of the research chamber and hoped, very sincerely, that Drav would listen to a dead man's warning. She already knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that he would not. Drav came himself because he did not trust the job to anyone else. He told himself it was tactical precision. Quietly remove the bondholder, and the creature simply never activates. A missing person is not a threat. A missing person is not a battle. The old archivist's records assumed a direct confrontation. They said nothing about a clean, silent extraction in the middle of the night, no weapons drawn, no alarm raised. He brought 5 soldiers, all of them experienced, all of them hand-selected. None of them told more than they needed to know. They moved through Dusk Gate's eastern perimeter at the lowest point of night. 2 hours passed when the settlement's lights had gone to standby. No weapon signatures. No comm traffic. Drav had studied the settlement layout from Hessa's surveillance data. He knew which building was Drew's. He knew the man worked late and slept light. What he did not account for was that it did not matter. Drew was asleep at his desk. He had fallen asleep in his chair over his research notes, head on his arms, lamp still on, the soft scratch of his own handwriting the last sound he had made before sleep took him. His outpost was warm. Outside, Ardenmoor's bioluminescent forest pulsed at the edge of the settlement in long, slow waves of blue, unhurried, quiet. Sola was on his back. She lay across his shoulders and the back of his neck in the way she had lately taken to sleeping, curved there like she had grown to fit the space, her tail trailing down the back of the chair, her wings loosely folded, her face resting against the side of his collar. Her scales were dim gold in the low light, barely glowing, steady. Drav's unit moved through the door without sound. They spread through the small outpost, 1 soldier to each window, 1 at the door. Drav himself crossed the room in 4 steps and stood behind the sleeping man. He looked at the dragon. The dragon did not move. He had half expected something, some animal awareness. He had read the records and half believed them and half told himself that a creature the size of a large cat, warm and small and sleeping, could not be what Ulvin said it was. He nodded to his lead soldier. The soldier gripped Drew by the collar and dragged him upright. Drew woke the way people wake when seized, violently, with a sound that was not quite a word, his hands going out to catch himself, the chair scraping backward. The lamp knocked sideways. The research notes scattered. And Sola slid. The motion that dragged Drew upright tilted his shoulders and broke the surface she had been sleeping on, and she slid off him and fell toward the floor in the way of sleeping things that have not yet caught up to the fact that they are falling. Drew felt her go. He was not fully awake. He was afraid. He did not know who had him or why or what was happening. But he felt her go, and the first clear words that came out of him, before any word for help, before any word for himself, were aimed downward, instinctive and low and genuine. Sola, Sola, stay. He was afraid for her. Fully, completely afraid. Not for himself. Sola hit the floor. The room went very still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference. Quiet is an absence of sound. Still is when everything in a space stops, including things that were not moving before. Her eyes opened. Not violet. Not the warm, sleepy color that Drew had looked into 100 times across the last 3 months. White. A white that had no comfortable comparison. Not lamp white. Not star white. But the white of something that predated the vocabulary for light. It came from the center of her eyes outward, and it did not illuminate the room so much as it made the darkness step back. She stood up. She was still small, the size of a large cat. She did not grow. She did not shift or transform. She simply stood on 4 small legs on the floor of a modest research outpost on a frontier world and existed with her full self. And her full self was something the universe had not displayed openly in 4,000 years. The scales ignited, not with heat, not with fire, but with that same ancient white light, from the tips of her silver-edged scales inward, covering her entirely in seconds. Her wings spread, not large enough to fill the room, but large enough that the soldiers near the windows moved back without deciding to. Every piece of Vorcai technology in the room died. Weapons, comms, the faint blue glow of the armor's sensor systems, all of it, gone, silent, dark. Not damaged, not shorted, just gone, the way a fire goes out when the air leaves. The lead soldier released Drew. Drew stumbled, caught himself on the edge of the desk, and looked down. Sola walked toward him. Not fast, not aggressive. She walked the way she always walked. Unhurried, certain, as if the floor belonged to her because the floor did not know well enough to disagree. She stepped between Drew and the soldiers and stopped. She looked up at Drew. He looked down at her. He was breathing hard. His hands were shaking. He got them to stop. "I'm here," he said. His voice was low and level. "I'm okay. I'm right here." Sola held his gaze for one more second. Her scales stayed white. Her wings were still spread. Then she turned to face Drav, and the light on her scales deepened, moving from that edge of the universe white down into a gold so rich and dark it was almost amber, the color of something very old settling into itself. Outside the outpost wall, the ground hummed. It was not loud. It was the kind of sound that moves through the soles of your feet before it reaches your ears, a frequency so low it is more felt than heard. Something vast shifted in the dark beyond the settlement's edge. The bioluminescent forest pulsed once, not blue this time, but gold, a single long way from the tree line outward, as if the land itself had exhaled. Drav ran. He did not order the retreat. He did not signal his unit. He moved for the door, and his soldiers moved because he moved, and they ran through Duskgate's dark paths and through the perimeter and into the silver grass, and they did not stop until the command post was around them and the doors were sealed. Behind them, in the outpost, Sola stood between Drew and the empty doorway. The light on her scales dimmed slowly. White to amber, amber to gold, gold to the soft, warm glow of her ordinary sleeping light. She shook herself once, lightly, the way animals do when resettling. Then she turned, climbed Drew's leg, climbed his torso, and draped herself across his shoulders in her usual place. She closed her eyes. In less than a minute she was asleep. Drew stood in the middle of his outpost, alone, with overturned notes and a dead Vorcai comm unit on the floor and the faint, gold-warm smell of ancient light still in the air. He put his hand up and held Sola gently in place. His hands were steady again. Outside, the forest glowed blue and quiet, and nothing moved, and the night continued as if it had not just witnessed the end of something. Duskgate was quiet when the sun came up. Not the quiet of aftermath, not the held breath quiet of people waiting for the next thing to go wrong. A different kind, the quiet of something having passed through and left the air cleaner. Birds that lived in the bioluminescent forest, small creatures that made a soft three-note sound in the mornings, were singing. They had not sung in 3 weeks. Drew was outside. He had been outside since before dawn, sitting in the grass behind his outpost with his back against the wall, watching the sky move from black to deep blue to the pale gold of Ardenmoor's first light. Sola was in his lap, curled on her side, deeply asleep. Her scales were their usual warm gold. Her face was relaxed. She looked like nothing more than a very content small creature, comfortable and warm and completely at peace. She had not stirred once through the night. Commander Osei found them there just after sunrise. She came around the corner of the outpost with her comm in her hand and her expression already set to the particular focus she used when she was managing 12 problems at once. She stopped when she saw Drew. She looked at Sola. She looked at Drew. She sat down on the ground beside him without saying anything, which was unusual enough that Drew glanced at her sideways. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Osei said, "I owe her an apology." Drew thought about that. "She won't remember you said it." "I will," Osei said. Sola breathed a small gold breath, slow and even, and the morning light caught the silver tips of her scales and scattered it across the grass in tiny warm points. 3 weeks later, the Vorcai Empire issued a formal withdrawal. No military statement. No press briefing. The official communiqué was 1 paragraph, and it said that Ardenmoor and the surrounding sector had been reassessed and removed from active territorial consideration. The document used bureaucratic language that said everything and explained nothing, the kind of language that empires use when they do not want to say what actually happened. Hessa's message reached the Xenobiological Archive at the nearest human university on the same day the withdrawal was issued. She did not include her name. The message read, "The dormancy records of the Ardrith are accurate." The archivist was correct in all particulars. The archive director forwarded it to 3 senior researchers and 1 historian of pre-expansion alien civilizations, and all 4 of them requested everything Duskgate's xenobiologist had logged about the pale gold creature he had been keeping in his satchel for the past several months. Drew sent the full file without hesitation. He also included, at the end, a note that said, "She is doing well. She is currently asleep on my desk. She has been asleep for 14 of the last 15 hours. I believe she is fully recovered from whatever she did, though I have no measurement for that. She ate well this morning." He did not tell them about the way she had looked at him before she turned to face Draft. He did not know how to write that in a research log. He was not sure it was research. The settlement rebuilt. The communications relay came back up. 3 families who had left during the second Vorcai push came back, and 2 new families arrived who had heard that Duskgate was, against considerable odds, not going anywhere. Elder Pharaoh came to see Drew one evening near the end of the 3rd week. He came the way he always came, unannounced, unhurried, knocking once on the open door before coming in. Sola was on the windowsill. She had recently discovered the windowsill and had taken to sleeping there in the late afternoon when the light came in at an angle and lit her scales into something that looked like captured sunlight in solid form. She was there now, one wing draped over the edge, tail curled around a stack of Drew's books. Pharaoh looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know what she is now?" he asked. Drew set down his pen. He had been writing the field report, the official one, the long one, the one that the 3 senior researchers and the historian were waiting on. He had been working on it for 4 days. "I know what she is to me," he said. Pharaoh nodded, slow and certain, as if this was exactly the right answer and also the only answer that had ever mattered. He stayed a while and drank the tea Drew made him and said very little, which was his way, and then he left. Drew turned back to his report. He had been struggling with the final section, the part where he was supposed to provide a tactical and biological assessment for the wider record. He had started it 4 times. He wrote it now, simply, without stopping. She was never protecting the settlement. She was never protecting humanity or our colony or any principle of territorial sovereignty. She is not a weapon in any strategic sense, and she never was. She is a creature who bonded to one specific person and who will, apparently, reduce an interstellar military operation to a full retreat if that person is threatened. The Vorcai Empire's tactical assessment classified human emotional attachment to other species as an irrational behavioral pattern and a military irrelevance. They were, to my knowledge, the most technologically advanced force this colony had encountered. They were not wrong about most of their data. They were wrong about that. The most dangerous thing on Ardenmoor is currently asleep on my windowsill. She will probably sleep for another 10 hours. She will wake up and eat and climb to my shoulder and breathe her warm light on my face, and then go back to sleep. She has done this every day since I found her. I do not believe this makes her less dangerous. I believe it means the danger and the warmth are the same thing, and that the Vorcai, in all their sophistication, never built a threat model that could account for ordinary kindness. I do not think they are alone in that. He filed the report. Across the room, Sola exhaled a long breath, shifted on the windowsill, tucked her face against her own wing, and slept in the last of the afternoon light, small and gold and perfectly, completely at peace. The forest beyond the settlement glowed blue. The birds sang their 3 notes. Duskgate breathed and rebuilt and lived, and the twin moons rose slow and white over a world that was, finally, no longer afraid.